Hello, everyone, and welcome either for the first time or welcome back to Turning Towards Life. This is Lizzie and Justin, and we are here in our weekly fashion of being together and wandering into I think every single time we gather, beautiful conversation, Justin. And thank you for being with us. I want to honour whatever the background kerfuffle of our lives is right now. I certainly have background kerfuffles, and I'm really grateful to be here for the beautiful sane-making, centering practice that this is. And I want just to say that whatever the background kerfuffle in your relationships or your family or your work or the world or whatever is for you right now, it's welcome here. And let this be a space that opens both in welcoming of all of that, but also as a kind of sanctuary as well, which it certainly is for me every week. And it's just a wonderful thing to be able to keep drawing on the world's wisdom and bringing it forth in this small and significant way that we are, Justin. It's such an important thing. It feels ever more important that this is what we do, is draw on the wonders of the human heart and mind to create these beautiful sources and let them be more fully in the world and more fully in our lives because of us processing them this way, running them through our souls, our bodies, our hearts and minds, and then feeling into the world, like how it changes our world. Like my inner world changes every week, evolves every week because of the conversations that we have. I'm very, very grateful for that. And Justin, thank you for bringing these left field, wonderful sources each time that mostly, sometimes I know what they are because I've seen the stuff that you've seen, but many, many times I haven't. And I'm so grateful for the kind of diversity makingness of that in my life. So thank you. And thank you to this person who's written this source, Gunilla Norris, as well. It's such a beautiful one for you to bring, Justin.
Really welcome, Lizzie, and hello, everyone. I'm just thinking, Lizzie, how the world is full of sacred sources, and that's what this conversation is that you said to me once that you know when you read something whether it's going to be the kind of thing that belongs here. And I don't think it's necessarily about what's in it. It's something about how it is, the way in which it's been brought into the world. I think the spirit with which it's brought into the world. And then what we do is we take the source. And you and I have been talking a bit about this week, Lizzie, I know in the background, but put it between us so that then there are three of us in our conversation. There's you and there's me, and then these words. And of course, also the person who's written the words is present in some way. And then the combination of a source and two that becomes three then unfolds into like an unfolding blossom bud, unfolds into something expected and unexpected, unique at the same time, which is why it's such a joyful living practice. So it's wonderful to be back here. And I want to say, as I always do, that for all of you who are with us, you can always find the source. Turning Towards .life is a place that all the sources live, with all the videos and ways to contact us and ways to get this in your inbox and ways to support us if you wish. And lots of people do that. And thank you to all of you who find a way to do all of those things. Two, we're feeling very supported. And okay, well, here we go. Here's this week's source, which is called Within Each of Us There is a Silence. And it's by Gunilla Norris. Within each of us there is a silence as vast as a universe. We are afraid of it, and we long for it. When we experience that silence, we remember who we are, creatures of the stars, created from the cooling of this planet, created from dust and gas, created from the elements, created from time and space, created from silence. In our present culture, silence is something like an endangered species, an endangered fundamental. The experience of silence is now so rare that we must cultivate it and treasure it. This is especially true for shared silence. Sharing silence is, in fact, a political act. When we can stand aside from the usual and perceive the fundamental, change begins to happen. Our lives align with deeper values, and the lives of others are touched and influenced. Silence brings us back to basics, to our senses, to our lives. It locates us. Without that return, we can go so far away from our true natures that we end up quite literally beside ourselves. We live blindly and act thoughtlessly. We endanger the delicate balance which sustains our lives, our communities, and our planet. Each of us can make a difference. Politicians and visionaries will not return us to the sacredness of life. That will be done by ordinary men and women who together or alone can say, remember to breathe, remember to feel, remember to care. Let us do this for our children and ourselves and our children's children. Let us practice for life's sake.
Thank you, Justin. Within each of us, there is a silence. Within each of us, there is a silence as vast as a universe. We are afraid of it, and we long for it. When we experience that silence, we remember who we are, creatures of the stars, created from the cooling of this planet, created from dust and gas, created from the elements, created from time and space, created from silence. In our present culture, silence is something like an endangered species, an endangered fundamental. The experience of silence is now so rare that we must cultivate it and treasure it. This is especially true for shared silence. Sharing silence is, in fact, a political act. When we can stand aside from the usual and perceive the fundamental, change begins to happen. Our lives align with deeper values, and the lives of others are touched and influenced. Silence brings us back to basics, to our senses, to ourselves. It locates us. Without that return, we can go so far away from our true natures that we end up quite literally beside ourselves. We live blindly and act thoughtlessly. We endanger the delicate balance which sustains our lives, our communities, and our planet. Each of us can make a difference. Politicians and visionaries will not return us to the sacredness of life. That will be done by ordinary men and women who, together or alone, say, remember to breathe, remember to feel, remember to care. Let us do this for our children and ourselves and our children's children. Let us practice for life's sake.
Lizzie, there's lots in here that is a kind of a call to action, or maybe a call to non-action, to a way of being with ourselves and being with one another that we somehow, our contemporary culture seems to have a hard time including. And I want to come to that probably later as we go. But actually where I want to start is with this amazing first 3 lines. Within each of us there's a silence as vast as a universe. We are afraid of it and we long for it. And that those 3 lines moved me so much because seems to me, Lizzie, that there's something that we are right at the heart of ourselves is this vast, including, fertile, life and presence-filled silence. There's something, as Gunilla Norris goes on to say, look, this is where we came from. This was the ground from which we sprang. And I would, if I were writing this, which I didn't, so I don't want to mess with Gunilla's poem, but if I was going to say this in a way that really feels true for me today, I would say within each of us there is this vast, kind, deep, courage-filled, loving, living, silent presence. And there are many parts of us that are afraid of it, or afraid of the possibility of being in contact with it, and they all long for it too.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that goes on, everything that Gunilla goes on to write about why silence is a political act and why what it is to stand aside from the usual and what it is to perceive the fundamental has got something to do with the way in which we humans are inside us are a vast multiplicity, a huge community of different parts of ourselves with fears and longings and relationships between them that we've talked about so many times before, that I think is so illuminating. And to see in a way right now, many of us are caught up in a wider culture which has many good things to say about it, and also has a kind of a way that it can grab our fearfulness, grab our righteousness, grab our smallness, grab our grandiosity, grab all the things that take us away from our quiet center. And the more we get pulled into that, the more frantic parts of us feel like they're getting fed by what they need, and at the same and feel terrified of giving it up. But at the same time, when we let ourselves, what we can find out is that there is something inside each of us and between us that is inherently a kind of goodness. There's a kind of life-filled possibility. And when we find our way to it, we don't want to lie, and we don't want to hurt one another, and we don't want to turn away. And we want to find a way to be truthful, and we can we can be patient, and we can do the painstaking and difficult work of healing our communities and healing between communities. And what these words of this poem, within each of us there is a silence, one of the things I so appreciate about it is the faithfulness to that we are that first and foremost, that's what we are. And there are so many reasons why it feels frightening sometimes to sidle up to the thatness of ourselves, or at least parts of us feel frightened. My experience more recently has been that when it's possible for me to find my way to that quiet center, instead of being afraid, I get filled with what I can only describe as love for the world and love for life, and I can take care of, depending upon who I'm talking to and what I'm encountering, maybe there will be some very frightened ones in me that will want to pull me off and polarize me, but the quiet center is a place from which it's actually possible to respond with some wisdom and some care and some depth to the world. So I'm so very glad to be reminded of this.
I feel really led, I'm thinking, by this sense that to be part of this silence, this shared silence, is to lead us back to ourselves. And this bit in the middle, which where Gunilla says silence brings us back to basics, to our senses, to ourselves. It locates us. I can really feel that kind of habitual, more fearful life, it doesn't really have the capacity for me inside of it to feel located. And I know that in that silence, in that kind of that goodness and that kindness and that quiet space of center that you're talking about, Justin, it's like I'm able to find what's really here. And it's not that the fearful parts or the selfish parts or the greedy parts or the graspy parts aren't real or something. They feel real to me. And yet, I think inherently there's a kind of knowing that they're not the way home. And then being in contact with the centered part where I remember to breathe, to feel, to care, to do this for our children, ourselves, and our children's children, when that arises in me, something way bigger than my own wants and desires and all those things. It's so easy, as you say, to feel my love of something much, much bigger than what I would call my own. And I think that's when, so in the bit above this as well, when Ganilla says our lives align with deeper values and the lives of others are touched and influenced, I feel like that's the beauty of it, is that when our lives become about something on a kind of in an orientation kind of way, when our lives become about something bigger, something more than just whether I'm going to be successful or whether I have what I want or whether I'm happy or all of those things. But when that generosity of spirit is allowed to be kind of bestowed on the world because I've made contact with that that's inside and centered, then change does start to happen. So all of the parts of me that I kind of want to push and want to change and want to make things better and all of those things, they have beautiful, good intention, but without the silence as well, without the kind of centeredness and without the depth, that feels quite futile as I'm talking about this as well. So I'm really appreciating the kind of, I've said this a million times, Justin, but the kind of the general accusation I get for being me and doing the things I do is like navel gazing and there's no point and doesn't get anything done, and like all those kind of cynical views that I continue to keep encountering in the world. It doesn't, those views can be really kind of disheartening, and this is reminding me of the substance of the thing that we're up to, and reminding me that without silence, really there isn't any reflection. There isn't any observation of what's actually going on here. There isn't any genuine contactfulness with another being. There's so much value in what's being perceived as this kind of navel-gazing way that doesn't seem like it's productive. And increasingly, I just think people are saying, "Oh, you're not being capitalist enough for me," or something. You're not focused enough on money or success or living the dream or something. And so it's becoming less hurtful and less spiky. But I'm just appreciating this for the reminder of the substance that silence is, the substance that being is, the intelligence that being is. And that as we cultivate it and commit ourselves to it, and how it informs the action that we take, how it informs and is imbued throughout the values that we hold and the way we treat others and the decisions we might make in our lives, and the causes we might support or the missions we might go on or whatever we're going to do. I'm really grateful to feel the substance of that and for it to be really dignified and intelligently brought to us through this piece of writing.
There's this beginning part where Ganilla writes that we are creatures of the stars, created from the cooling of this planet, which was created from dust and gas, which was created from the elements, which was created from the time and space, and which all came from silence. And there's Lizzie, there's a kind of cold, empty reading of that. But there's also another way to read that, which is that the silence is already filled with something. The creative, generative potential from which everything meaningful comes. It's a little bit like, so the silence of space and the silence inside us in this way are the same thing, and it's the same as the silence of the loamy earth in just now when we're having this conversation is early spring and life is bursting forth all over the place again, or at least around here. So I think when I hear you talk about this, a kind of separation that gets made between silence is somehow navel gazing and all of the valuable stuff is where the action is. What I want to say about it is silence on its own that stayed empty would not bring us the world we long for. Right. So the truth in the don't just spend all of your life gazing at your own navel. The part of that that's true is the part of that that recognizes that we have to build houses and raise children and till the land and make things that help one another and have an economy and, all of those kind of things. But when the story is those are the only things that matter, we very, very quickly end up in a going fast for the sake of going fast, making for the sake of making, consuming for the sake of consuming, and it ignores the source from which everything comes, the deep source from which everything comes. And so when action gets untethered from the source of things, it shouldn't be surprising that we feel spun away from one another. And I thought when you were talking about that, I thought, well, the invitation here is to, so many of us feel so empty so much of the time. There are parts of us that feel afraid and desperate and empty and longing. They feel like there's a great absence. And what we try to do is fill it with all of our activity, fill it by consuming or getting ahead or something. And when all of that comes from our desperate craving to fill the absence, it's really, really hard for us to meet our lives and to meet one another. And it's also really hard to locate our action in something that we feel like is life-giving and sustaining. So the gift of your orientation that gets you in trouble with some people and the gift of Ganila's poem is that both are pointing us towards they're pointing us, I don't know, say this two different ways. Like one is upstream into the place that the water which feeds everything flows from, or to the origins would be another way of saying the same thing, like from where does all of our action flow? And that's this reminder, which is that for what we get up to in the world, to be contactful with the actual sacredness of our lives and everyone's lives and the life of this planet and the life of all the other beings on this planet, somehow what we have to do is to join up our activity to a life-giving, values-filled source that is unshakable in its compassion and creativity and courage and presence and patience and all of that. And I think that's what you're inviting us to and what Gunilla is inviting us to. And that takes practice. Because as Gunilla says, the experience of being in contact with that is so rare that it's incumbent upon us to cultivate and treasure it, especially together.
I'm reminded, Justin, of I must have read this somewhere or someone said it to me, which is something like 90% of good teaching or good parenting or good leadership is observation. And it's kind of reminding me of that, because if in any role where I have any sense of power or responsibility, if all I'm doing is acting without consciousness, without this being included, like you're saying, it's an extremely different set of actions that I take, intentions that I have, relationships that I build, strategies I make. It's an entirely different world if it's all based in action versus it's all based majority in reflection, consideration, genuine thinking, conversation, wondering, finding out what the best thing is, really, really, in service of whatever it is that you're up to, that I'm up to. It really is a different life. And I'm so appreciating the intelligence that is. It's so easy to get sucked into a busyness narrative, or looking like you got loads on or something, which increasingly just feels really, in my life anyway, like I know that part really, really well, but it feels so empty now. I look at it and I think, my goodness, that's just pretending. So much of my busyness is like a pretense. And I feel kind of shame of that, and the kind of, I want to hide a little bit for ever having been, oh yeah, I'm so busy. It's like a way of not connecting or something. And yeah, to try and paint that picture feels like a protection mechanism as well. Because when I'm busy and when I'm caught up in all of this action, I don't really have to be intimate with you or tell you what's really happening or be in a genuine conversation with you, because I've just kind of pushed that out of the way by being in perpetual action the whole time. And it's so easy to become like that, because that's the invitation that's there the whole time. We get met with like, wow, you must be so successful, or you must be so, your life's full of action and how amazing. And actually, I know in my life when people have come along who haven't been in the busyness narrative, who haven't been in the kind of constant action, and you've actually asked me some questions or been really interested in me, it's very genuine times, and that's very meaningful, and has always led me into deeper inquiry and wondering, and led me to question myself as well, instead of leaving me to rely on this kind of very thin way of being in the world. So I want to just say how grateful I am to all the ones along the way in my path who've been this, who lived from a place where silence got included and informed the action that they took and take, and how glad I am to have been influenced by stillness and by silence and by reflection and thinking and wondering and observation of life, rather than, I just feel like that's come along enough that I was never kind of left to my own devices of my own feeling completely caught up in our culture. And I feel glad of that, really glad of that. And of course, it takes whatever my openness is to notice that that's happening, and someone's interested in me, or someone's asking a question, or someone's leading me to something that I haven't thought about before. But it really does, I feel really grateful and moved by all the ones who have bothered to stop and come from silence towards me with questions and wonderings and reflections and ways of living that have opened my heart and mind to, I guess, more intelligence, I could say.
You said that you're grateful for the ones that you know in your life who come from this place in them, and whose lives are not just an endless filling up a apparently empty space by getting busy, full, desperate. And I was thinking about all the comparisons we have, when we meet someone, we think, oh, look at your shiny, excellent life. I must fill my life in a way to get the same. That when people come from centered, Gunilla Norris is inviting us into practices of silence, but really the invitation is to be the ones who come from the place in us that is this vastness. And you were talking about your appreciation for those people. And I have those people too. And I know that you and I are committed also to doing all we can to be those people also. But one of the things you notice is that being with someone that way, they're likely to be interested in you, because what we're talking about here is, I think, is rediscovering the sacredness that is in the center of each of us. One of the things that our culture really has a hard time with is helping us find the sacredness that we are. You know, the particular miracle that there's a Lizzie and a Justin, and then all these, thinking about all of you, everyone who's listening and watching and being alongside us, the one-time event that each person is. The desperate, frightened parts of us can take us so far away from that in their desperation. And when we find a way to have that be the source of our presence in the world as much as we can, and it's always a pattern of being pulled away and then having practices and people that help us return and being pulled away. But there is no doubt in my mind that when we can find the sacredness that is each of us, the one that we long for, that parts of us might be a bit frightened of, but we really long for, we have a much, much better chance of also being in contact with the sacredness in others. And when we all feel our own sacredness and then the shared sacredness that we all are, then we're in a much better place to take care of that which really needs taken care of, and we get less polarized and we get more truthful and we get to listen more and we get interested and curious about one another, because I think that empty silence is also curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a kind of love. And so many of the things that have us go desperate and whirling are things in our culture that seem to address the emptiness, but when actually what we're longing for is contact with the thing that feels like emptiness, but when we are in contact with it is actually kind of sacred fullness.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad for a chance to have, use that language a little bit in our conversation together, this turning back towards that together. And we're at that point in our conversation where it's time for us to end. So I want to thank you, Lizzie, for being someone who's fiercely dedicated to walking this path, keeping on finding this in yourself and in other people. And it's such a huge part of what makes this conversation flow for 387 so far weeks and on and on. It's a very precious experience to be in conversation with you, and thank you to everyone, all of you who are around us. Please know that you're very welcome to come back. We're going to keep on going and finding sources that maybe help us all return to this sacred center, find our way back to ourselves and to one another, turning towards one another and to life. And remember that you can contact us. You could drop us an email, Lizzie or Justin, or hello@turningtowards.life. We love to hear from you. And all being well, we will be back again next week for our 388th conversation.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.